Just a few days ago, we celebrated, I won't say celebrated, commemorated the 1-year anniversary of January 6th. And as expected, there was the usual orgy of absurd overstatement and a repetition of these incendiary accusations, insurrection, terrorism. Poor Ted Cruz, who actually blurted out it was a terrorist act, got into a huge amount of trouble, was kind of excoriated by Tucker Carlson, backed off from his earlier statement. But what makes all of this so absurd is how do you have, I want to know, an insurrection without insurrectionists? Let's note that not a single one, not one, of the January 6th defendants is even charged with insurrection. Now, so if they did insurrection, there would be proof of insurrection. They would be charged with insurrection. That is, in fact, a very serious offense. But in fact, they're charged with things like trespassing, parading through a public building, and so on. So obviously, no insurrection is involved. And we should do nothing more than just chortle when we hear these absurd statements because they bear no resemblance to reality. But it's very clear that the left is using this narrative to justify demonizing, if not criminalizing, the entire MAGA and Trump movement. Here, interestingly, is Washington Governor Jay Inslee, obviously in a kind of post-anniversary of January 6th afflatus. He goes, we have to criminalize the lies about election results. I mean, this guy's actually saying that people who question election results should be charged with a crime. Now, he's calling for this in his own state, Washington State. But look at the madness that is now posing for respectable public opinion. He says that, quote, it should be a misdemeanor subject to incarceration, quote, to willfully lie about election results. But what does this willful lying mean? People who question election results are trying to dispute what those results might be. By the way, Democrats have done this going back to the 2004 election. They certainly questioned the election results of the 2016 election. So this has occurred on really both sides. And in a free society and in a society that has a First Amendment, questioning election results is part of the process. It's something that one has a legal right to do. And in fact, making sure that election results are fair is obviously essential to any functioning democracy. Now, Inslee kind of knows all this. So he says, well, that this is only going to be a crime if, quote, there is knowledge that there's a potential to create violence. But the problem is with the word potential, because anything has a potential to create violence. Whenever you question an election result, someone can say, well, that could lead to another insurrection. That could cause all kinds of problems. So what you're doing here is this is another kind of attempt to put a clamp, put a chill on free speech under the threat that it could be criminalized in some way. Now, a number of Democrats, and this is Democrats in office, but also leftists in the media, are also saying that if we can find Republicans that had a role in January 6th, and the real question is, what do they mean by role? There certainly were no Republican elected officials who, stormed the Capitol. No. But the idea is the Democrats are saying they should be disqualified from running again. Wait, what? In a democracy, you're going to disqualify members of the opposition party from running for re-election? I mean, this is what they do in Iran. In fact, the U.S. government recently issued a statement where it basically said that the mass disqualification in Iran, this is by the so-called Guardian Council, a group of like 9 mullahs. They looked at 583 Iranian candidates and they basically said, you can't run. So in Iran, they have free elections, so-called, but they're not really free. Why? Because you can only choose from a pre-selected group of candidates picked by the ruling coalition, the ruling council itself. And that's apparently what the Democrats want to do in this country. They want, Democrats do, to have a kind of veto power over Republicans. And over which Republicans run for office. It's absolutely absurd. Now, they're appealing to an obscure civil rights law. An obscure law from the Civil War era. In other words, going back to the 19th century. And the Civil War law came because after these southern states were being readmitted to the Union, there were a number of people who showed up, either running for office or purporting to already be in office. And these were people who were leaders of the rebellion. These were leaders of what? Well, this was in fact obviously an attempt to split, not just an attempt, a successful attempt to split the country into two, to provoke a war that cost well over 600,000 lives on both sides. So that the Civil War law was passed for that circumstance, to deal with armed rebellion against the country. Let's remember that, just as many people were killed in the Alec Baldwin shooting incident as were killed on January 6th, namely one. And the one person in the case of January 6th, as we all know, was a Trump supporter, Ashley Babbitt. But as the New York Times said recently in one of its articles, quote, every day is now January 6th. And we see right here the left strategy to create a kind of sustained panic. They're using January 6th as a sort of Reichstag fire incident in which it's a pretext. It is an attempt to say, listen, there was an attempt to overthrow the Constitution, and so we're now going to do that. We're going to destroy democracy in order to save it. We're going to protect democracy by preventing members of the opposition party from running for office. We're going to protect civil liberties. How? By squashing the free speech of people who question the validity of elections. So what we see here is this is not the normal functioning of things. The Democrats are trying to ramp things up and trample on our basic civil liberties. In fact, trample on democracy itself in an absurd pretense of, quote, standing up for democracy.